The first sound Arthur heard that night was not his daughter's voice. It was the thin, fanatical beep of the hospital monitor counting out the seconds he had left to save her. The room smelled like sanitizer and sleepless fear. Rain tapped softly against the black window, and the city beyond the glass kept moving the way cities always do, cruelly unaware that one little girl's future was narrowing by the minute. Arthur sat beside the bed in a plastic chair that groaned every time he shifted his weight. He had his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles looked sanded white. His daughter's fingers rested inside one of his palms, tiny and warm and much too light. She was asleep, though not deeply. Every few breaths, a cough fluttered through her chest like paper catching on a nail. Arthur leaned closer and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. He sang under his breath the same lullaby his wife used to sing in the kitchen when the apartment had still known laughter, when the future had still seemed like something you reached by working hard and keeping your word. His voice was rough, almost embarrassed by its own tenderness, but he kept going anyway. For a moment, that small song pushed back the machines, the smell, the cold fluorescent light. For a moment, it sounded like home. Then the doctor stepped in. He did not need to say anything at first. Arthur knew the look. Doctors had a way of putting bad news on their faces before they ever opened their mouths, as if they hoped sorrow might arrive softened by warning. The man folded his hands, glanced at the chart, then at the sleeping girl, and lowered his voice. The surgeon had an opening tonight. It was the only opening they could promise. The deposit was $10,000, and it had to be secured by midnight, or the slot would go to the next family on the list. Arthur stared at him. Not because he had not understood the words, but because he had understood every single one. Midnight. $10,000, or she loses her chance. The doctor said there might be other openings later, but his careful tone made the truth plain. Later was another word for maybe. Maybe was another word for danger. Arthur thanked him because men like Arthur thanked people even when their world was cracking open. The doctor squeezed his shoulder and left. The door clicked shut. The monitor kept beeping. His daughter slept on, trusting him with a future he could not yet afford. Arthur stood, stepped into the hallway, and took out his phone. No one said yes. He called the bank. Denied. He called a loan office that advertised same-day approvals for emergencies. Denied. He called a man whose number he had sworn never to use, a man recommended in whispers around construction sites whenever rent came due and dignity had already left the room. The answer came with interest that sounded less like math and more like a threat. Arthur would owe twice the amount in 2 weeks, and the man wanted collateral Arthur did not have. Arthur ended the call before the man could finish describing what happened to fathers who broke promises. He stood in the stairwell outside the pediatric floor and pressed the phone to his forehead. The concrete wall was cool against his shoulder. Below him, somewhere near the vending machines, the little boy was laughing at something. The sound drifted up the stairwell and broke apart before it reached him. Arthur shut his eyes. He had spent his whole life believing that if you worked hard enough, showed up early, kept your head down, and did what had to be done, then the world might not love you, but it would at least leave your child alone. He had been wrong. When he finally went home, it was not because he had solved anything. It was because there was nothing left to call. Then the floorboard near the bedroom closet gave its familiar squeak. He froze. For years he had learned how to move around that sound. Tonight it seemed to call to him. Arthur crossed the room, knelt, and pulled back a row of old storage bins. Behind them sat a narrow wooden box scarred at the corners, locked with a cheap brass clasp that no longer closed properly. Dust filmed the lid. He touched it the way a man touches a grave marker he has avoided for too long. Then he opened it. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, lay a chess set. The pieces were weighted and worn smooth in places by a younger version of his hands. The White King had a chip at the base. One black knight leaned slightly to the left, because Arthur had once dropped it on concrete outside a tournament hall in St. Louis when he was 16 and too gifted to believe life could ever turn on him. Beneath the pieces lay old score sheets, yellowing at the folds, and a newspaper clipping with a photograph of a thin teenage boy holding a trophy he could barely lift. The caption called him a prodigy. The article talked about national ranking scholarship offers, the future of American chess. Arthur folded the clipping closed before he had to read his own name. He had not touched a bishop in 11 years. Now he reached into the box and lifted the White Queen. It sat in his palm with terrible familiarity. He put it back. At a pawn shop on Halstead, Arthur sold his drill, his sockets at his television, and finally the wedding band he still wore on a chain beneath his shirt. The broker counted out $1,000 in small, humiliating stacks. Arthur took the envelope and walked back into the rain empty-handed. Weeks earlier, a laborer had shown him Julian Vance, the Grandmaster who mocked amateurs for money underground. On the bus downtown, Arthur found Julian live, bragging about a 10-to-1 bounty. When the bus reached the riverfront, he got off in the rain. A man the size of a refrigerator stood outside, checking names. Arthur told him he did not have one. The bouncer looked him over, took in the jacket, the work boots, the exhaustion, and smirked like he had already decided how this story ended. Then Arthur pulled out the envelope. Not enough to impress, but enough to amuse. The man buzzed him in. The sound hit first. Bass from hidden speakers pulsed through the floor. Glass clinked at a long bar lit blue from beneath. Voices rose and folded over one another in wagers, gossip, and practiced disbelief. Somewhere farther in, multiple chess clocks ticked in fast, nervous bursts. The room smelled of cologne, money, and the electric heat of people watching risk from a comfortable distance. Arthur stood just inside the entrance and let his eyes adjust. The club was arranged like a theater built by gamblers. Small tables lined the outer floor, where private games unfolded under pendant lamps. In the center, on a raised platform, a single board sat beneath bright white streaming lights. Cameras angled in from 3 directions. Monitors displayed the live position overhead. A half-circle crowd ringed the stage, drinks in hand, faces eager for someone else's disaster. And there he was. Arthur started toward the platform. Hostess with a tablet stepped into his path and asked if he was staff. Arthur said no. Her eyes flicked to the stain on his sleeve, the scuffed boots, and then back to his face with immediate dismissal. He kept walking. The crowd opened, reluctantly, more from curiosity than respect. A few people laughed before anything had even happened. One man lifted his phone to record. Another said, "This should be quick." Arthur reached the table and pulled out the empty chair. Julian looked up, first annoyed, then delighted. "Well," he said into the mic, drawing the word out for his audience. "Either my ride is here, or somebody lost a janitor." Laughter rolled through the room. Arthur sat down. Up close, the board gleamed under the lights. Ebony and maple squares. Tournament pieces. Expensive clock. Julian smelled faintly of cedar and ambition. Arthur placed the envelope on the table between them. "Want 10-to-1 odds," he said. His voice came out lower than Julian's, softer too, which somehow made it carry farther. Julian stared at the envelope, then at Arthur, then at the camera. "Hear that, chat? Cinderella wants a line." He tapped the bills with one manicured finger. "How much is this?" "Cab fare?" Arthur said. A whistle came from somewhere in the crowd. Julian smiled. "And if you lose?" "I lose." Julian spread his arms as though consulting the room on a point of philosophy. "I admire confidence. Misplaced confidence is my favorite kind." He snapped his fingers, and a man in a velvet blazer stepped forward with a cash case. Julian lifted out 10 thick stacks of $100 bills and set them beside the board one by one, the room growing louder with each slap. 10,000 in plain sight. 10,000 that could become an operating room, medicine, another year of bedtime stories. Arthur did not look at the money again. Julian leaned back. "What's your name?" Arthur, like that. A murmur passed through them. Julian's smile tightened a fraction. He was used to fear apology, bragging, drunkenness, excuses. Calm was harder for him. Calm did not feed the performance. "Fine," Julian said. "Arthur, no last name, wants 10 to 1. I'm feeling generous." He pointed toward the camera. "Let the record show that I accept this completely irresponsible wager." He sat. Arthur sat opposite him. A dealer reset the pieces with efficient hands. White to Julian. Black to Arthur. The clock was placed between them like a detonator. Around the platform, conversations fell away. Even the bar noise seemed to recede. A camera light blinked red. Arthur could hear his own breathing, slow and careful. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the hospital monitor answered with its own imagined rhythm. Beep, 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 beep. Neck flashed a smile at the lens and pressed the clock. The game began. Julian took the bait almost immediately. He began to play faster, harder. Each move landed with a theatrical click, then a sharper slap on the clock. He smiled without looking up. "You know," he said, voice angled toward the microphone, "most people at least wear a clean shirt before they donate to the channel." A few people laughed. Arthur moved a pawn and said nothing. Julian developed a knight. "What is this for, Arthur? Gambling debt? Ex-wife trouble? You look like a man one payment behind on everything." Arthur's fingers brushed a bishop, then withdrew. He chose a modest developing move instead, almost timid. The board opened along lines he had not visited in years, yet still knew the way a body knows how to breathe. Patterns returned in fragments first, then in full chords. Pressure points. Temperament. Julian's appetite for spectacle. The man was not just playing the board. He was performing dominance, which meant every move carried vanity inside it. That vanity had shape. Shape could be steered. Julian's queen came out early, aggressive and a little flashy. Strong enough over the board to punish weakness, but also just immodest enough to reveal the man behind it. Arthur lowered his eyes as if rattled. He reached for a pawn, changed his mind, and retreated a knight in a move that made two spectators groan with sympathetic embarrassment. Julian grinned. "Oh, this is beautiful." He glanced at the monitor overhead, then at the crowd. "Chat, I told you. Sometimes the universe sends you content." Arthur heard a phone chime as donations started landing on the stream. He kept breathing. Across the table, Julian mistook patience for confusion. That was the first real mistake, though not the last. He began talking more, circling Arthur with words while his pieces took space. He commented on the jacket, on the boots, on the calluses. He guessed Arthur had wandered in after hearing men smarter than him mention chess at a bar. He asked whether Arthur even knew notation. He asked whether Arthur understood that Grandmasters could smell panic. Each line got a laugh, and each laugh fed him. He was a man standing too close to a ledge because applause kept telling him he could fly. Arthur made a small, apparently ugly pawn move in front of his king. Julian barked out a laugh loud enough to startle someone near the rail. "There it is. There it is. Watch this, everybody." He just cracked his whole center open. "I don't even have to work now." He leaned toward the camera, eyes shining. This is why amateurs should stay online. In person, they humiliate themselves too fast. Arthur let the words pass through him. In another life, years earlier, anger might have sharpened him. Back then he loved proving people wrong. Back then chess had been a stage where humiliation traveled both directions. But hospitals change a man's sense of theater. So does grief. Arthur was not here for pride. He was here because the little girl in a narrow bed trusted that when the world shut its doors, her father would still find a window. Julian lunged exactly as Arthur knew he would. He brought the queen deeper, pairing threat with drama, sniffing out a fast kill that would play well on stream. Arthur answered by dropping his bishop where it could be taken. A deliberate offering. A piece hung loose, almost begging for punishment. The crowd sensed blood. Someone actually started counting aloud under his breath. Another phone rose to capture Arthur's collapse from a better angle. Julian did not think. He collected the bishop instantly. The room popped with approval. Arthur's gaze flicked over the board once lightly, then fell again. Inside, old machinery turned with absolute clarity. Every square had become loud. Every line glowed. He could see the net now, not as a possibility, but as a structure already standing, waiting only for Julian to step into the final thread. Julian leaned back, savoring. "You got guts," he said. "No sense, but guts." He wagged a finger toward the board. That piece had rent due too? Arthur ignored him. Instead, he adjusted his clock with a fingertip, almost absently, and for the first time looked directly at Julian rather than through him. Something small changed in the air. Maybe Julian felt it. Maybe not consciously. But his smile dimmed for one heartbeat. Arthur's eyes no longer belonged to the man who had sat down. The slump was still there, the jacket still oil-stained, the hair still damp from rain, but the gaze was different now, steady, cold, old in a way that had nothing to do with age. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for the room to stop lying to itself. Julian's fingers hovered over his next move. Then his ego rescued him from caution. He pushed harder, arranging his attack for flourish rather than precision. He wanted the clip, the headline, the replay with laughter layered under it. His queen, rook, and minor pieces crowded the kingside with the swagger of an army marching into a city after the gates have already been opened from within. Arthur retreated again, this time with his knight. The move looked panicked. The crowd loved it. Julian practically glowed. "He's folding," he announced. You can hear it in the silence. This is the sound a bad decision makes when it realizes it has children. A ripple of shocked laughter ran around the platform. Arthur's jaw tightened once, no more than that. Beneath the table, his left hand closed around the edge of the chair until the wood creaked. In his mind, he heard his daughter cough. He saw her turning toward him through half-sleep, trusting, small. He let the image steady him rather than break him. Julian moved again. And again. Not many moves, just enough. The kind of sequence that looked forcing because it was filled with threats, the kind that overwhelms weaker players because panic makes them treat each danger separately instead of seeing the geometry underneath. Julian had built his entire public persona on creating that sensation. Make the other man afraid. Make him react. Make him forget that the board punishes vanity, no matter how expensive the watch on your wrist. Arthur saw the pattern, 3 moves ahead, then 4, then the one point where everything collapsed inward. He waited 1 extra second so no one would mistake what was coming for speed. Then he touched the rook. At first, the room did not understand. The move looked too simple. A straight slide across polished wood. No sacrifice. No dramatic reach. No flourish. Just a rook cutting through the noise and landing on its square with one clean, booming thud that seemed louder than the music, louder than the crowd, louder than the city outside. Arthur pressed the clock. "Checkmate," he said. Silence. Not a hush. Not surprise rippling into chatter. Actual silence, the kind that feels like the room itself has forgotten how to breathe. Julian did not move. His smile remained on his face a fraction too long, disconnected now from meaning. He looked at the board, then at Arthur, then back again. One hand went automatically toward his queen, stopped, shifted toward his king, stopped again. He blinked. The color began to leave his face one careful shade at a time. A woman near the rail whispered, "Wait." Someone else said, "No way." Julian leaned closer. His lips parted. He picked up a knight, set it down, touched the rook line, followed the discovered coverage, traced the trap backward. What had looked like panic was structure. What had looked like blunders were invitations. The exposed center, the retreating knight, the hanging bishop, even the awkward king-pawn push, every ugly little move had been a gate, and Julian had strutted through each one, because his own reflection kept blocking his view. He was dead on the board. His queen was irrelevant. His king had no square. The mating net was airtight. 3 moves ago, he had still been performing for the room. Now the room was watching him learn that performance could not negotiate with geometry. Julian grabbed the captured bishop from beside the board as if holding it might rewrite history. He placed it back illegally, stared, removed it, muttered coordinates under his breath. His expensive watch clinked against the table. The live chat notifications began to chirp from a nearby monitor in wild, rapid bursts, no longer applause so much as electronic hysteria. Arthur stayed still. The crowd exploded all at once. Gasps, curses, laughter of an entirely different kind, the rough, delighted roar people make when a throne tips over in public. Phones shot up everywhere. Someone shouted that the board feed had to be wrong. Another voice yelled, "Ruined it." A man near the bar started clapping in stunned disbelief. The hostess with the tablet had both hands over her mouth. Julian finally looked up, but not at the crowd. At Arthur. "Who are you?" he asked. The microphone caught every crack in the question. Arthur leaned back for the first time all night. The exhaustion had not left his face, but something under it had settled. Not triumph exactly. Something quieter. Something earned. "A father," he said. Then he reached for the cash. He unzipped the duffel bag at his feet and swept the stacks inside without hurry. Not greedy. Not theatrical. Just efficient, like a man packing tools after a job. Julian watched with open disbelief, hands still on the edge of the board as if balance now required furniture. "You sandbagged me," Julian said. Arthur zipped the bag closed. "No," he replied. "You did what men like you always do." Julian swallowed. The room pressed in, hungry for whatever came next. Arthur stood, slung the bag over his shoulder, and looked down at the board one last time. "You saw what you wanted to see," he said. "That's not strategy. That's arrogance dressed up as talent." No one laughed for Julian now. Arthur turned and walked through the crowd. This time they parted immediately. Some stared as if trying to memorize his face before legend replaced memory. Some lowered their phones, suddenly ashamed of where they had aimed them 10 minutes earlier. One older man near the exit lifted his glass slightly in respect. Arthur nodded once and kept moving. Behind him, Julian's stream kept running. The cameras loved collapse as much as conquest. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. Arthur crossed the parking lot without feeling the cold. The duffel bag knocked lightly against his leg with each step. $10,000, exactly what midnight required. Not a miracle. Just enough. Sometimes enough is the closest thing the world offers. He drove faster than he should have back to the hospital, one hand tight on the wheel, the other resting on the bag in the passenger seat like it might vanish if left unattended. Every red light felt personal. Every slow driver looked like an insult. But beneath the urgency there was another sensation rising, one he had not let himself touch until now. Hope. Fragile. Dangerous. Real. When he reached admissions, he did not waste time on breath or explanation. He set the cash and cards on the counter. A clerk blinked, called for a supervisor, then another. Forms appeared. Receipts printed. Signatures multiplied. Arthur signed everything they put in front of him. His handwriting shook only once when the words responsible party crossed the page. By the time he got back to his daughter's room, nurses were already preparing her. She was awake now, pale and drowsy, frightened enough to be brave about it. Arthur sat beside her and took her hand again. The monitor still beeped, but it no longer sounded like a countdown. It sounded like company. She looked at his face, reading what children always read first. Not words, not logic, but weather. "Dottie?" she whispered. He smiled, and the smile almost broke him. "I'm here, sweetie," she said. "You are going to be just fine." Her small fingers tightened around his. "Did you fix it?" Arthur thought about the warehouse, the lights, the laughter curdling into shock. He thought about the chest set still open on his apartment floor. He thought about every year he had spent pretending that part of himself was gone because life had demanded a different man. Then he looked back at his daughter. "Yeah," she said softly. "I fixed it." They wheeled her away a few minutes later. Arthur walked beside the gurney until the double doors marked the line where fathers had to stop and faith had to continue without them. He kissed her forehead and watched the doors swing closed. Then he waited. Waiting is its own kind of battlefield. There's no opponent you can see, no move to calculate, no clock you can hit to force the world along. There is only a chair, stale coffee, a television no one watches, and every fear you have ever buried arriving to sit beside you. Arthur stayed there through the longest hours of the night, elbows on knees, hands clasped again, not unlike the way the night began. Except now the clasp held something different. Not certainty. Never that. But a reason to imagine morning. Just before dawn, the surgeon returned, still wearing the fatigue of the operating room. For one terrible second, Arthur could not read his face, and felt the floor tilt under him. Then the man smiled. The procedure had gone well. Arthur exhaled so hard it hurt. He sat down because his legs forgot their job. He covered his eyes with one cracked hand and laughed once, a broken, stunned sound that turned halfway into a sob. The surgeon spoke on recovery, monitoring, next steps, but the essential truth had already landed. His daughter was alive. The night had not taken her. News of what happened at the club spread faster than Arthur could have imagined. By noon, clipped footage of Julian's collapse was everywhere. By afternoon, internet sleuths had identified Arthur from an old tournament photo dug out of archive pages and forgotten forums. The prodigy who vanished. The gifted teenager who disappeared before the scholarships, for the titles, for the polished world of sponsors and strategy camps. People love a resurrection story almost as much as they love a public execution, and Arthur's night offered both. Reporters tried calling the hospital. The club deleted and reposted clips. Chess channels broke down the trap frame by frame, some praising Arthur's nerve, others ridiculing Julian's vanity, all of them profiting from a father's desperation one more time. Julian himself uploaded a statement before dawn, blaming distraction, angle shooting, emotional manipulation, anything but the truth. No one bought it. By evening, sponsors had begun to distance themselves. His subscribers mocked the very arrogance they had funded the day before. Arthur ignored all of it. He stayed by his daughter's bedside through recovery, reading her stories in a voice still rough from no sleep. When she finally asked for apple juice with the fussy authority of someone feeling human again, Arthur laughed for real. The sound startled him. He had almost forgotten it belonged to him. A week later, the letter arrived at the apartment in a clean white envelope forwarded through the hospital social worker. Inside was an invitation from a foundation connected to a university chess program offering to fund coaching, education, and a public exhibition if Arthur wished to return to competitive play. He read it twice, then set it aside. There would be decisions later. For now, later had finally become a place his daughter could reach. As for Julian, the throne never really recovered. Humiliation is survivable. Exposure is harder. People could forgive cruelty when it looked like strength. They had no patience for it once they saw it attached to cowardice. His audience thinned. His invitation slowed. In the clips that circulated most, what fascinated viewers was not the checkmate itself, but the second, just before Arthur said the word, the exact instant Julian's face realized the world was not arranged for his comfort after all. Arthur never watched that clip again. One evening, after his daughter came home and fell asleep on the couch halfway through a cartoon, he knelt by the closet and pulled out the wooden chess box. He cleaned each piece with a soft cloth. He repaired the leaning black knight with a tiny touch of glue. Then he set the board up on the kitchen table where morning light would hit it. Not because the past had come back unchanged. It never does. But because some parts of us do not die when buried. They wait. Quietly. Patiently. Until love gives them a reason to rise. People said Arthur's victory was about genius. It was, but love gave him the nerve to spring it. A proud man played for applause. A tired father played for time. And when those two kinds of hunger met across 64 squares, only one of them understood what losing would cost. That's why the Grandmaster never had a chance.